Hey there, folks. Tim Slade here from the eLearning Designers Academy. When you're trying to break into the field of instructional design and learning and development, or maybe you're just trying to grow within it, it's so easy to think that you need to be great at everything, that you need to love everything, that you need to be fully capable at everything. Course creation, facilitation, e-learning development, learning strategy, evaluation, LMS administration, and everything in between. And you know what? When you try to be everything, you end up being a generalist by default. You chase every opportunity, but you never really own your strengths. But you know what? Here's the thing. Finding your niche isn't about putting yourself in a tiny box. It's about finding, that common thread that's flowed through your entire career, the thorough line that connects your values and your interests and the impact you want to make. And you know what? For Kike, that thread has always been about being a change agent. And so in this conversation, Kike shares how she moved from content creation to performance consulting, how she carved out a role that sits at the intersection of learning, operational efficiency, and strategy, and how getting clear on her values shaped everything from her confidence to her career direction and even her portfolio. So if you've ever wondered how to define your niche, how to position yourself for the work you want to do, not just the work you can do, this conversation is going to resonate with you. Now, before we dive in, if you haven't done so already, please make sure to hit that like, subscribe, and bell button to get alerted the next time I publish a video just like this one. And of course, join us inside the eLearning Designers Academy at elearningacademy.io, where we help new instructional designers and e-learning developers grow their careers by focusing on skills first. With that out of the way, let's dive into it. Hi, Kix. How are you?
Hi, Tim. I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for joining. And I don't know if everyone has this context. You told me I can call you Kix. How do you say your actual name? Because I'm not going to get it right, so I'm going to stick with Kix. But how do you say your full name, just for everyone's context?
Kikelomo. My full name is Kikelomo Idowu.
Beautiful name.
Don't make me call it. Yeah, but folks call me Kike for short, or Kix. Yeah, Kike.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so happy to have you here tonight. And you have, the reason I wanted to do this session with you tonight is because you have such a really diverse background. You have such an interesting journey on how you got into learning and development. But more importantly, when you and I started working together, I don't know how long ago, a month and a half ago or a month ago, as we were collaborating on your portfolio and your brand, one of the things that I so appreciated was how you showed up with so much specificity and intention about what you wanted for yourself in your career in learning and development. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight, because I think that's something that a lot of folks can benefit from, especially those of you who are, newer to the industry or getting into it for the first time. But let's start here. I mean, what's your background? How did you get into learning and development? Tell everybody a little bit about your background, about your journey here to the U.S. and into learning and development, and then we'll go from there.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, team. And hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be here. So like I mentioned earlier, my name is Kikelomo, and I'm sure you're wondering, where is that name from? I am Nigerian, from the Yoruba tribe. So born and raised in Nigeria, started my career in the nonprofit space as an international youth advocate volunteer. And essentially, I educated policymakers on policy issues that impact youth health and development. So it was a lot of influencing government policies, contributing to government policies as well, right, to ensure that young people have access to affordable, accessible, and available healthcare services on one hand. But then on the other hand, I educated a lot of young people about opportunities to meaningfully engage in policymaking processes, such that I wasn't the only mouthpiece, right, in the halls of government, but there were a bunch of young people who were advocating for themselves and amplifying their voices as well. And that opportunity allowed me to travel internationally. So I would attend international conferences, and there's a reason I'm mentioning that, because through those opportunities, attending international conferences, giving speeches, lobbying stakeholders, sharing my experience as an international youth advocate in Nigeria, the work that I'm doing with policymakers and all the things, allowed me to build my confidence, to discover my superpower for public speaking. And so I did that for about 6, 7 years in Nigeria up until 2014. I took a break here in 2014 and explored implementing a passion project. And, that project was around helping young people in an elementary school move to a better elementary school that had enough classrooms and all the things. So I lived in a rural community back in Abuja, Nigeria, and there was an elementary school next to my house, and I'm going somewhere with all of this. It all comes together. And they had only 2 classrooms for over 500 pupils, and so that was a project that I took on. But things didn't go out as planned. Some people might call it a failure because I wasn't able to actually implement my plan. But somehow those kids got moved to a better elementary school. So that was the passion project I explored in 2014. Fast forward 2015, I relocated to the United States, got married to my childhood sweetheart. Story for another day. And then I reached out to the Foundation Center. The Foundation Center is based in New York. They are now called Candid. They go by Candid now. They had come to Nigeria to train nonprofit organization on how to fundraise and how to write grants and proposals and all the things. And I had represented my organization at the time. And so I attended the training, made a strong impression. And so fast forward, when I relocated to the US, I was like, hey guys, I'm here. I have some time. I'm happy to work for free. And so at the time, the Foundation Center was exploring implementing a learning management system, this learning tech, it seemed to be fancy to them at the time. And even though I had never seen an LMS, the Nigerian girl in me was like, I got you. I'll figure this thing out. And so that was kind of like my introduction to learning and development, if you will. I got the title Learning Management System Consultant, a mouthful. And I did that project for about 6 years. And, the rest is history. After that project, I was like, this thing isn't so bad, because at the time I was exploring pursuing a master's or a career in like global policy, social development, and all the things. But I was like, if I can get paid for something that I, haven't necessarily been trained to do, maybe there is potential here and I can, kind of leverage and build on it. And from there, I applied to other organizations, worked in nonprofit, HR, oil and gas, biotech, tech, and all the things. And so that's kind of like, how I transitioned into L&D and, found my way into learning and development.
So you fell into it, I mean, by accident, by just saying yes to things, right? So I have to ask, I mean, if you take us back to when you were in Nigeria, and I mean, where did you get your drive for social advocacy and, trying to be the initiator for change and speaking up? I mean, where did that part of you come from? Because a lot of young people don't do that,
Yeah. So that's a deeply personal question, just because the work that I did was specifically around youth health and development, and it was around ensuring that young people have access to age-appropriate healthcare information, sexual health education, pretty much, which of course at the time was a taboo. So growing up for me was kind of rough. It was kind of rough, and there were certain things that I had experienced that shouldn't have happened, and at the time I didn't know that was what it was. And so when I became older and saw other young people, suffer, and, just the way the social context is, sex education is a taboo. Meanwhile, boys and girls are constantly being abused. Parents refuse to educate their children about sex. Meanwhile, teenagers are having sex. The rate of, teen pregnancy high. At the time, young people accounted for the highest population of people living with HIV/AIDS, and most of whom got infected through unprotected sex. And I worked with an organization, nonprofit at the time, called Education as a Vaccine. So it was a priority for us to educate young people and provide access to knowledge and information to young people so they can make informed choices. And so for me, a lot of that drive came from wanting to empower young people to not go through some of the things I had gone through. And even though growing up for me was kind of ghetto, I still had a lot of privilege. It just always made my blood boil every time I saw a young person who was either a teenage mom who would go to an hospital, but then they won't attend to her. And the Nigerian culture can be very stigmatizing as a young person at the time. You would go to imagine a young teen mom go to the hospital and then she's being re-traumatized. The nurses are bashing her and blaming her. And back in Nigeria back then, as well, when young people come forward to their parents to say, oh, I was abused or so and so happened to me, oftentimes the children or the young people are the ones that are blamed. So there's this culture of, as a child, you're meant to be seen and not heard. And the moment I kind of got liberated and was old enough to speak up, I wanted to be a force for change.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a powerful story. And I think, I think it's a really good example of how good can come from trauma. You know what I mean? Like we experience things, and unfortunately, those things are how we learn that stuff has to change, right? And then we use it we put it back out to the world for good.
Absolutely. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Okay, good. Well, so talk to us a little bit about, you came to the US and you said yes to being an LMS implementer and administrator.
Yes.
And how did that lead to then, for everyone's context, Kix, you've worked at AWS, Chevron, Amnesty International, all of these different companies where you've worked in jobs that had some intersection with learning and development and performance improvement and whatnot. What happened after you decided to say yes to being the LMS person? How did that lead to your career in learning and development after that?
So I had no idea what I was doing. I said yes to LMS consultant role. And as I took on the job, I started learning about this learning management system. It was called Bridge. And somewhere along the line, the folks I was working with were like, Cakes, you've done really interesting work in Nigeria. Why don't you turn your experience into a course for entry-level nonprofit professionals? I was like, okay. And so remember that project I told you about, that passion project of the kids in the elementary school that was almost a failure because I wasn't able to implement anything, even though the goal I had was accomplished, because the goal was to get the kids a better learning environment, which ended up happening. But my program design and all the things that I wanted to implement to get there, I didn't have to get the chance to do that. Anywho, I had captured or gotten videos and pictures from all of those things. And so, I decided to create this course that I called How to Be a Social Change Agent in Your Community, Translating Your Ideas into Action. Such a long title, but it was full of passion. And I just wanted, young people or folks out there to learn how to identify a problem and take that and build that into something, translating your ideas into action. What does that look like? So essentially, the course was me walking them through how I identified the problem, what my thought processes were, what I did, what I didn't do, and all the things. And it was quite exciting. So I did that. And the project turned out to be successful. But in the nature of nonprofit organizations, they didn't have enough money to keep me on because everything is always donor funded and they had run out of funds. And so I started looking for opportunities, and I found I got hired by GEMS. GEMS is a really great organization that does work with young women and girls that have been sexually exploited and domestically trafficked. Right? You can imagine my connection to, young women again who are being violated and abused and whatnot. And I just wanted to, really pour my heart into that work. And fortunately, at the time, it was a training coordinator role. I didn't have to create any curriculum. They had the curriculum already designed. I just had to deliver it. And remember, I had been attending international conferences, speaking, doing all the things. That's my jam. And so I was like, yeah, but about a year into that role, I became uncomfortable because of the trauma I was exposed to. And so there was a lot of what's that thing called, vicarious trauma.
Mm-hmm.
The way the the office was set up was we had a center where some of these girls would come. We had survivor staff. There's a terminology called survivor staff. We had survivor staff, and it was just a lot. And so, I couldn't handle all of that. And so I quit. And 4 months later, I got a job with Amnesty International. And the job was fantastic because Amnesty hired me to train activists in the US to do what I was doing in Nigeria. So it just felt like a perfect fit because, Amnesty is a global grassroots organization, movement building organization, and they get people to advocate and, advocate for policies and whatnot. And I was responsible for training those volunteers. I also used to be a volunteer in Nigeria as well. And in Amnesty, they had like different programs for different age groups. We had the student activists, we had the adult activists, and all the things. And we would have like monthly meetings, regional conferences, annual general meetings. And it was in that role that I began to spread my tentacles, if you will. I was experimenting, I was doing all the things. In my mind, I thought I came up with the idea of pre-training assessments and in-training assessments because I wanted to make things better. I thought I was being innovative, like I'm doing things. And, when I trained the activists, I started talking about things like training cycle. I thought I came up with these ideas because, I had learned from my mistakes, and I started thinking about training in cycles, the things that you do before the training, the things that you do in the training. Long story short, it was at that point that I was like, Kike, there's something here. You need to be about this. Why don't you just get a degree in this and make this your career? Because at the time, I was like, okay, even if I want to be a professional in this, what is the degree that I'm going to study? Mind you, I have an undergraduate in sociology. Okay, so I started exploring and I stumbled on instructional design, and it sounded really sexy at the time, like, learning technology and all the things. And, the future is technology. So you gotta have foresight. So, I thought, yeah, so that was how I signed up. Quinnipiac University, paid out of pocket, signed up for the master's program in instructional design, and I started learning more things. It was just really exciting. And so while in the role at Amnesty International as well, the scope of my work expanded into DEI. And again, being, super passionate person and wanting to see everyone succeed and all the things. It's like, and also being a woman of color as well in a predominantly white member-driven organization, if you will. And oftentimes the issues Amnesty focuses on doesn't necessarily reflect the population, that they serve. And so I, started doing DEI work. I was DEI program manager and learning and development, specialist as well. I got promoted in that role. I was really feeling myself. And, at that point, my role, once I started doing DEI stuff, I started exploring HR type situation because now I was, I found myself helping employees, deal with conflict situations, doing trainings around DEI. That wasn't necessarily around learning and development, but now sort of like being a subject matter expert in this field and collaborating with HR more. And so I've lost my train of thought. What was the question? I don't want to keep
That's
going
okay.
because
That's okay.
yeah.
I think,
Well,
what I want to say, Kix, is that I think what I hear in your story is that a lot of times, and this is true for a lot of people who are here tonight, who are new to instructional design or you're getting into it for the first time. You start off in one particular career path thinking this is what I'm doing, and it leads to you being exposed to skills or opportunities or practices that you don't even realize you're being exposed to in that moment. And then that leads you down another path and down another path and down another path. And before you know it, you found yourself creating a career into something that you didn't even know existed in the first place, right? So I'm curious to hear, one of the things I've talked about before when people accidentally fall into this industry, and your story is a really great example of accidentally falling into it. Was there any point as you started as it started becoming aware to you that you're operating in an industry that has a name, and pre-assessments are a thing that, you didn't invent, but you thought you invented it, and that's okay. That's great. Is there a moment that you had a career identity crisis where you're like, oh no, I'm I've I've painted myself into this thing that, do I keep going down the social advocacy route that you were going down, or going into learning and development? Did you experience any
Yeah.
identity crisis in that? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Oh, yeah. Even with like carving a niche in L&D, because at some point at Amnesty, it just felt like I was doing everything, from
Mm.
training coordination to facilitation to developing videos. And as I started learning about the instructional design ecosystem, I realized that there were different things. And, there was a part of me that was hungry for um being a master at something, just being an expert at something. Because then again, I worked with people who were communication specialists. They knew what they were doing. Everybody had, their area of expertise and like core. But for me, it was either I'm like consoling a coworker who's crying, doing like HR mixed things and like, training and all the things in between and and whatever. So yes, I definitely struggled with that. And at some point I decided that I was going to elevate my career myself and function as a learning and development manager. And at that point at Amnesty, because I wasn't working with a lot as well. It wasn't like they had like all the infrastructure. I had to be creative and resourceful. And so I started like trying to partner with or communicate with leadership to bring in infrastructure to make my work easy. Like, let's be about this L&D stuff. I need support. I need resources. Let's talk about, professional development strategy and program for the organization and all the things. But they just weren't having it. And it was at that point that I realized that if I'm going to be more, this is not the environment for me, because it just felt like I was floating on, on all the things, and I didn't want
Yeah.
that. I wanted to master, be a master at something.
Well, okay. So that makes sense. Let's fast forward to most recently, and I can tell everybody a little bit of context of, my experience of you when we first started collaborating together on your portfolio and whatnot. And I'm as you're talking, I'm making all of these connections in my mind that make so much more sense now about you and your journey than they did before. And I'll tell you what I mean by that here in a moment. So for everyone's context, when Kix is somebody who is a student in my cohort program. I'm not here to plug that, but I will put a link in chat to it. But at some point, usually when I'm working with students, I will get to a point where they've learned some skills, and then we start working together on their portfolio and their brand. And so Kix and I had our first meeting to start talking about her portfolio maybe a month and a half ago. And one of the
Mhm.
things that I was so impressed by when we first met to start talking about that is you were a little bit guilty about it at first. You felt a little bit guilty about it. At least that's how I remember it. Is you told me you were not interested in designing and developing e-learning or courses.
Mhm.
And I think you were feeling a little concerned because I remember the first version of your portfolio that you showed me and created, you had put some e-learning courses in there, right? And we can put a
Yeah.
link to that too in chat for everyone to see. This was Kik's initial portfolio that she had developed for free in Google Sites. And one of the things that I was so happy with is that you were really intentional and specific in saying, I'm not really interested in this type of learning and development or instructional design. I don't want to be a course creator. I don't want to be sitting behind a computer doing storyline all day. And one of the things that you described to me, and the label that we gave it, was learning and performance strategist. And you were more interested in the intersection between the way a business operates and how do we improve,
Mhm.
human performance
Mhm.
in order to accomplish those goals, and how do you change operations. And now that you tell that story, it all connects, because as you describe your past as being an agent of change, being a change agent, That's exactly what you're wanting to do in learning and development. It's the same work of changing, being a change agent and initiating change by bringing different parts of people together and initiating that. Does that make sense as I say that?
It
Do you
does.
view an overlap between your work as a learning and performance strategist to what you were doing previously?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
So what does that mean to you? I guess when I say, like, as you describe yourself as a learning and performance
Yep.
strategist, what does that mean? Because
That's
let me say this, because here's the context why that matters to people
yep.
who are listening. I think
Yep.
a lot of times people have a very narrow definition of what it means to be a professional in this industry, or what does it mean to be an instructional designer,
Yeah.
or what does it mean to be an e-learning developer. And I think there's so much noise that gets put on things like learning storyline and developing an e-learning course and learning rise and all of that. And the
Yeah.
reality is that our industry, there's so much more to not
Yeah.
just being an instructional designer, but being a learning and development professional. So for you, with that context in mind, what does that mean to be a learning and performance strategist?
Yeah, so, I think to be a learning and performance strategist is to understand the business in which you're operating in,
Mm,
understand what the organizational strategic priorities are at an organizational level.
mm,
Now, understand that in order for those organizational priorities to be successful, people need to drive them. Right? An
yep.
organization doesn't exist in a vacuum. When you start up a business, right, you hire people, and those people need to drive business and make profit and achieve those organizational goals.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in order for those people to successfully achieve those organizational goals and, attain those strategic priorities that the organizations may have set, they need to be empowered. They need to have the resources to be able to succeed. Now, because I'm a people person and, remember I have a degree in sociology, I kind of understand how, human beings work and human behavior and what the things you can have the best, the most talented employees and still not succeed as a business. So, how do we put the right parameters, the right infrastructure, the right resources in place to ensure that the people that are driving the business are doing it efficiently, but then they are also serviced? I don't know if that makes any
Yeah,
sense. So, being a
absolutely.
learning and performance strategist is to be responsible, for the performance and the capacity development, the capacity of the people, the human resource, to be responsible for their capacity, for their ability to perform. And
Mm-hmm.
so what does that look like? It looks like, ensuring, it looks like understanding the people. First, understanding who are these people, what are their motivations, like all the things that you do in your needs analysis, right? Where they come from and all the things. But also understand what their performance gaps, what are the factors driving performance gaps? Because
Yeah,
oftentimes, as you know, my dear colleagues, training isn't the solution to everything. And so sometimes it could be a motivation gap, it could be an infrastructure gap, a policy gap. Those are the kind of things that excite me. I want to be able to, because, and I think the reason why this matters to me is because I have been an employee, that have felt unsupported, and that
mm-hmm.
also frustrated me. And so I want to champion, I tell my colleagues all the time, whenever I get a new job, I tell my colleagues that someday at the height of my career, I want to become a chief people officer or chief learning officer, because I want to be able to advocate for the people. Yeah, I hope that sort of like answers the
Yeah.
question.
I think
What? Yeah.
it's like one step up above from it's I think it's taking a broader view of learning and development and how that lives within the organization, where I assume part of, being that learning and performance strategist, your solutions might involve training,
Yeah.
or it might involve changing, the way a team is structured, or the way a processy
Yeah.
happens within the organization. Because I think it's incumbent upon us as learning and development professionals to recognize that, you know, to your point, like, training isn't always the answer, but that doesn't mean we don't have a role to play in helping the organization perform better. by changing the way it operates, maybe not just designing training, right?
And one more thing, there's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of human interaction, and I like human interaction. I don't want to be staring at a computer, figuring out what colors to use and formatting and, all the things. And so there's a lot of human interaction, engaging with people managers, so someone had even described my role as a learning business partner, partnering with people managers to understand where the pain points are. Are they managing for performance? Are their teams performing? What do they need to help their teams drive these business goals? What are the employee satisfaction scores look like, right? Empowering managers as well with the competence, to manage people, because that in itself is, another type of skill that we need to empower managers,
Yeah.
with. So so that's kind of like where I thrive.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, good. Well, I want to come back to that here in a moment about really standing confidently in your area of genius and expertise and all of that. I want to share. I'm going to copy this link. So, when you and I first started working together, and you decided, I don't want to put e-learning into my portfolio. The logical question was next, like, well, what do we put in your portfolio? And one of the things that then we decided to do, and I put a link to Kik's portfolio that she now has that we worked to develop, was, if you're a learning and performance strategist, my thought process was is we almost need to figure out how to brand you like a consultant, because that's really what you are. It's like, I
Yeah,
love the
yeah,
phrase you gave, like a learning business partner. You're an internal consultant helping bring all of these different moving pieces together through the lens of employee performance. And so one of the things that I recommended to Kix was like, well, then let's not put any courses in your portfolio. Instead, let's put case studies in your portfolio. Let's tell the story of how you worked with an internal client. What was the challenge? What was the problem? What was the solution? How did you implement it? And I think why that's so important is because, nowadays, when people think portfolios, they think, oh, I need to have the set number of assets in my portfolio. It has to be an e-learning course and 2 RISE courses and a job aid. When in reality, your portfolio might just consist of a collection of stories that talk about how you initiated change, right?
yes, absolutely. And I had plenty of those. I remember you asked for three, and I sent you like, I don't know, God
Like
knows how
7.
many. Yes, and yeah, and was some of the best work I've done have been, working with, often there's a performance gap, a business people manager or business leader reaches out to me and say, listen, this is what we need people to do, or these are some of the challenges that we're having. And what I would often do is go have conversations with both the people managers and the employees themselves to really understand what exactly is the core of this pain point. And sometimes it's just a recommendation for the manager to actually get training, to be able to have the language to lead the team better and have the confidence to stand in the authority of their leadership. And other times, yes, it's been, deploying a particular training on, say, I want my team to be able to work effectively. Let's get them on Asana. How
Yeah.
quickly can you do this and whatnot? So yes.
Yeah. So I'm curious then. Oh, I lost my train of thought, what my question was going to be. Well, let's talk about this. I'm curious to know, when you think about being really specific and intentional about the type of instructional design work that you want to be doing. Well, one of the things I always tell people, and I don't know if how this resonates with you, let me know. I always tell people, like, saying you want to be an instructional designer is as generic as saying you want to be a photographer. Okay. What I mean by that is, like, if you think about being a photographer, there's a lot of different types of photography. Are you a wedding photographer? Are you a portrait photographer? Are you a studio photographer? Are you a food photographer? Are you a nature photographer? All of those are different types of photographers. And while they all share a similar foundation in terms of tools,
Yes.
theories, and whatnot, the life of a wedding photographer is very different than
Yeah.
a nature photographer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think the same is true when we talk about being whether you call yourself an instructional designer or a learning performance strategist or an e-learning developer, what that means at each organization is different. And so one of the things that I've always found to be that I think is important is that, if you try to be all things as under the umbrella of learning and development, you're going to end up being really mediocre at a lot of things rather than being great at a few things.
Yes.
And so I don't know, tell me what has been kind of the mindset shift you've experienced in embracing doubling down on your strengths rather than continuing to expand your abilities, and then ultimately, focusing on trying to make your weaknesses not weaknesses anymore. I don't know. Does that make any sense as I say that?
Yes. I think, once I realized that I wanted to like have a niche for myself and become a leader, become a learning business partner, I started showing up as such. And so, I would still kind of like, at least at Amnesty, I would still kind of like do my, create training agenda and outlines and all the things. And then at some point, those things became boring and I could do them with my eyes closed. But I started taking on more.
Yeah.
Right. Things like helping the organization figure out professional development for the entire organization, helping the organization figure out how to roll out DEI, across all the different business units and ensure that each business unit had an organizational goal / outcome, because they made us do like yearly goals and whatnot. So you can imagine IT, for example, having a DEI goal within their IT framework, right? Helping them figure that out. So, just kind of let your life speak. There's actually a book called Let Your Life Speak. Let your life lead and let that burning passion drive you in the direction of, where your, biggest passion is, for lack of a better expression. And, kind of manage, those responsibilities. Eventually, what happened to me was the role didn't fit anymore. I got too big for the role and I became hungry and restless in that role. And that was when I joined Insperity, even though my time there was short, but I wanted to. And the role I did with Insperity was a performance consultant. And so it was I thoroughly enjoyed, working with CEOs and business leaders who would come to Insperity and say, oh, my team is failing, or, my executives are not getting along. That's my jam. Let's get in there and, help support what's going on. And so it was that situation where I became so hungry and passionate, and I just allowed my life to lead wherever, and I paid attention. I think that's another thing, paying attention to where the gaps are and not say, oh, that's beyond my pay grade, or I'm not going to do that. It's none of my business. If it's work that you enjoy and you have the capacity to do, and you want to explore, lean into it. It was when I started doing that I actually got promoted at Amnesty, but then eventually I just realized that I needed a different environment. And as I, walked my way through, all these different organizations, eventually I landed in AWS. And in AWS, I had the opportunity to actually manage instructional designers. I thought it was super, interesting, because even though I knew that I wanted to do performance strategy and whatnot, a part of me still felt like, you have a master's in instructional design, you should have a title called instructional design. And I would tell my learning designers at AWS, we call them learning designers, that I wanted to build a course as well. Like, just allow me build one course, and I eventually did it. And when I got in there, I was like, no. Like, this is not what I want to do. Because I realized for the first time, like, when you're within the, the interface, the e-learning interface, say RISE, for example, the way your brain works is really different. It was really shocking to me. I had never, like, I caught it. I was like, no, this is different. And then when I got out, and I had a meeting with them, I was like, oh, so this is what you people be doing in Articulate Rise, and trying to figure, I want to be that person, but it's not my calling. It's not for me. And, I just continue to lean into the area of my superpower. And that has led to me also creating programs that speak to that superpower even outside of work. And so I guess my charge is just continue to let your life speak and allow what is burning inside of you to find expression in your day to day. And it doesn't have to be at work. One of the things I've sort of like noticed that is a trend, and I may be wrong, is that when people want to build their instructional design portfolio, everyone is doing a recipe, which is great. Which is great. But like, you don't have to do a recipe. If you're
Yeah.
passionate about soccer or something, like I think there's a place for passion.
Yeah.
What is it that you love? Translate it to the work that you do, the tools that you have,
Yeah.
and yeah.
I think it's too, I wrote down the phrase pay attention.
Mm,
And what I liked about that is, when you're pursuing professional development or a career change, or you're new to an industry, you have to spend a lot of time paying attention to the way I've described it in the past. You have to really pay attention to the why you feel like you should be doing one thing or another. Why? I love asking this question to people. Like when say you're building a portfolio and you're working in storyline and you're learning storyline and you're building an example in storyline. Why do you feel like you should be doing that? And sometimes the answers are, well, I read an article that said I need a storyline example in my portfolio, or I'm seeing a lot of that on LinkedIn, or job descriptions list articulate storyline, the ones that I've looked at.
mm,
And the last thing on the list sometimes is because I really love digital multimedia and learning.
mm,
And so like the thing is the risk of like not understanding what your why is that you're going to create a bunch of samples of work that are going to appeal to a type of work that might get you hired for a type of work that you don't even know if you're going to want to do 9 to 5 every day. And
mm,
so, one of the things that as it relates to you saying pay attention is, if you're learning how to use, it doesn't have to be storyline, it can be anything. If you're learning how to do needs analyses all day, or learning storyline, or learning another tool, like you have to ask yourself, like, would I be happy doing this 9 to 5 every day?
yeah,
And if the answer is no, then that doesn't mean that there isn't a place for you in learning and development or instructional design,
yeah,
but maybe it's not being an
yeah,
e-learning developer, or maybe it's not, I would be miserable if I had to
mm,
do needs analyses all day. I have no interest in needs analyses.
mm,
Or I'd be miserable if my job involved coding in JavaScript. I know it's easier now because we can vibe code and whatnot, but like,
yeah,
I think my point in saying that is you got to pay attention to those things that are happening in the back of your brain as you're learning these skills, and then really focus on those things that light you up and align with your skill set, because you want to be you want to tap in and be better at the things that you're already great at, rather
mm,
than spending time
yeah,
improving the things that you're weak at. One of the things I've said to people, last thing I'll say, and I'll be curious to know how this resonates with you, Kicks, is like, I would rather fail doing the stuff that I love than succeed at things I hate. Because when you fail at things that you love doing, that light you up, at least you learn something from it and you can do something with that. But like when you
yeah.
succeed at the things you hate, you're just successful and miserable? That's not
Yep.
fun.
Yep. Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
that definitely strongly. Yeah. Yeah, that definitely strongly resonates because when you fail at the things that you love, it's actually not failure. And like
Mm.
you said, it's learning, it's lessons learned, and you actually get better without realizing it. And for the longest time, that was me. I wanted to figure this e-learning instructional design thing out and just be about it. It just wasn't my thing. It just wasn't my thing. And at some point I made peace with it and began to channel my energy in the direction where I got the most result, where, I loved and, everybody loved me back as
Hmm.
well. And I just shine. It was my superpower. Like it was getting to the point where people were telling me, you should actually do this more. Or, you should actually, I'm like, okay, so yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So what's next for you? What are you like as you think about the future of your career and how you've started branding yourself? What is it? How are you moving forward differently in your career, or more thoughtfully, or more strategically?
Yeah.
Um,
That's a really
yeah.
good. question. I want you to answer that question as well, but I'll go
Okay.
first. I think for me, I'm in a season where, I'm owning, also, I know this might actually sound surprising. I used to do social development work and all the things. And for the longest time, I I was kind of, I don't know if I should say ashamed, of owning my stuff as a learning and performance strategist. Like a lot of the people that I worked with in the social development space have like gone ahead to done like amazing things and whatnot. And I'm here trying to like fight for my life and like just make this thing happen. And since the pandemic, I've unfortunately been impacted by, multiple layoffs and whatnot. And I've gone through the process of really questioning my why and whether or not I chose right and all the things. And so, as a result of all of those things, I'm in a season where I'm owning my stuff. And so,
Hmm.
as I'm applying to jobs and I'm getting a lot of back to back rejections, and I just want to say, if there are people like that on this call, I see you, you know. The storm will soon be over, if you will. I'm channeling my passion into creating events. And so, like I mentioned, one of the things I'm passionate about is women, empowering women, supporting women, taking this instructional learning and development skill to actually put together professional and personal development event that will inspire people to stand in their authority, to stand in their power, to stand in their purpose. So there is that. On the other hand, I'm also preparing for my future as the chief learning officer and the chief people officer. As a Black woman in America, I mean, I don't know. I just want to be prepared. I'm exploring potentially getting an MBA, right? Because, in business, in corporate America, in order to get into those senior leadership role, I know team may not necessarily agree with this. You need to have an MBA. But as a Black woman, I feel like I need to,
Yeah.
do all the things and more just to make sure like I'm super ready, ready, ready and have the leverage and edge, if you will. So there is that, especially now that I'm not working full time. I have some time. If I get a job, I may do a professional MBA. If not, I'll do a full-time MBA. There is that whilst I continue to follow my passion in the direction of hosting those personal events and helping lives outside of work. And who knows, I might become like a global speaker or write a book or like a Lovey Ajayi, Brene Brown, all those things. So I don't know. So that's kind of like where I'm at. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, I think, I think sometimes it's easy to pigeonhole ourselves into certain industries or job titles or whatnot. And what I'm hearing you say is that, again, I'm going to keep using this phrase. I feel like it's cliche at this point, but I keep hearing the word change agent in my mind. You're trying to instill change and be that person who's that conduit of making all of this stuff come together. And and there was a period of time that you did that in learning and development, and there are other opportunities where you're going to find ways to do that. And I say that one of the things I've said to like transitioning teachers, because we have some of them here tonight as well, we have a lot of them in the community, is I think a lot of them go, as they're transitioning out of being a teacher and moving into an instructional designer, I think a lot of them think I'm abandoning this career and I'm starting a new career. And I'm like, no, you're still an educator. It's just a different type of education. It's instructional designer is an educator, teacher is an educator. It's just a different context, different audience, different types of content. The bigger thing that you have to get over is you were never meant to be a teacher forever. That was just a job title, right? And so for you, what's the common thread? It's being that change agent, whether it was doing it for social justice purposes in Nigeria, or how it worked out here in the US, and then doing that as a learning and development person at AWS or whatnot. And in the future, you're looking for opportunities to be a change agent.
That's right.
That's
You
the
see
common
me.
thread. I
You
see
see me.
you.
All
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Are you going to answer the question now?
What was your question for me now?
What's next for you?
Oh, that's a good question. Nobody asks me this question. What's next for me? Why?
Yeah.
I asked you this earlier because you told me you were going to ask me this question. What do you see that prompted that question?
So, Tim is an incredible human. He's built this e-learning designer academy that is just phenomenal. I don't know if you've gone through the program, the courses, the material, the meticulousness, the level of excellence
Thank
with
you.
which is poured into this community and built all of these things out is just ridiculous. And so in my mind, and he had mentioned earlier that he has, there are over 11,000 or 12,000 people in this community. That is huge. In my mind, I'm thinking, especially as a person who's driven by passion, at some point, there's got to be more. That thing, I keep doing my hand like this. There's always something that bubbles on the inside of you that is just hungry to just do more. And I feel like at some point you might get there where you've done your work with the e-learning designers community. You've built a great stuff, and the grace, the oil, the anointing, right, with which you used to build this, would nudge you to build something bigger. So who knows? So I'm just kind of curious to see what's
What's
next.
next?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I do appreciate all of those kind words. Gosh, well, when I started this, like in 2019, 2020, I think a lot of times, here's what I want to say. I think it's really easy a lot of times when we look at other people in our peers or in the industry, and we're looking at what they've created or what they've done or their success or what have you. We see the end result of their work and efforts. We don't see the journey that led there. And so then what our minds do is our minds make all of these really weird assumptions that it was some part of some strategic master plan that got them there. Or there had to have been some magical secret that they followed that if I just knew that same secret, I could do the same thing. And the truth is like, when I started this, I mean this wholeheartedly. When I started this, my goal was to write my book, create some courses that people could take. I would do some speaking, I would do some workshops. And that was really the extent of the vision. And like this community that we're in right now doing this live event, this only came about because a friend of mine in the industry was like, you got to check out this like community platform called Circle. And so on a whim one day, I was like, yeah, I guess I'll have a community. And one day I created a community, and so I stumbled into whatever it became, And so what I say that first off to say that like there was no master plan, there was no perfectly executed formula, and whenever you look at somebody's success or journey, there rarely is ever any master plan or executed formula. It might have been they're at the right place at the right time, or it was an accident, or or you're missing out on all the failures that came along the way. So for me, I guess as I'm thinking about, your common thread as being a change agent, I've been trying to figure out, I've been thinking as you were talking and as I've been talking, well, what's my common thread? And I think, for me, what I want to do next is I want to continue helping people learn how to make their own way in their lives and their careers. And what I mean by that is, as somebody who is a millennial, an elder millennial, I was born in 85. So I'm technically, I heard once they call it geriatric millennials. And I'm like, we're not going to use the word geriatric. I'm 40, so we'll use elder millennial. But we at least here in the States, we grow up being taught there's this formula to success in life. You graduate high school, you go to college, you get into a bunch of debt, you go find a job at a corporate office, you stay there forever, and then you're supposed to like retire into some happiness. And I think like collectively, we are recognizing that formula does not work anymore.
That's right.
And so and so what's next for me? There's a lot of things I could specifically share that I'm not ready to share,
Okay.
but it's under the theme of helping people, you know, take more control over their lives and their careers, because they have more control over their lives and their careers than I think a lot of times they give themselves credit for.
I like that. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing.
Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. It does make a lot of sense. And thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I think it'll be. And I try to embed a little bit of that here and there in our community, the
Yes.
10-day career mindset reset. If anyone's ever gone through that, I'll put a link to that in chat. That's
Yes.
completely free.
Yes.
That gives a little like preview of the type of stuff I would love to do for a larger audience
Yes.
outside of learning and development, which I know
Yes.
some of you in here tonight have gone through that. So
Yes.
yeah. So what other advice in our last few minutes, and we have some time for questions, so we can answer a couple of questions. Let's do this question first, and then we'll close up. So there's one question here. Somebody wants to know what types of jobs exist in the L&D world that deal with people more so than the actual development of training. Wondering what else is out there besides needs analyses and lesson plans. What are your thoughts on that, Kix?
Yeah, I think, what a just straight up answer the question, training specialist, learning and development specialist, because what comes to mind is that hierarchy. You're going to start out creating trainings, whether it's writing training agenda or creating training outlines. You don't necessarily have to be the person facilitating, kind of like an event coordinator for trainings. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's really sort of like how I started, and I started, immersing myself in other things. So, training coordinator, learning and development coordinator, and you just kind of work your way up. It was recently that I also found out that there's something called learning business partner. There are things like
Mm-hmm.
performance specialist, right? Learning and performance. And, I would say don't look at the job titles
Yeah.
because
They're meaningless.
sometimes exactly because these people in these organizations, they don't know about our work. They just want somebody to help them. So I would say focus on the job description and just focus on getting the job, just get in there. And then as you get in there, you kind of like oftentimes you might even have the liberty to make the job what it needs to be as well. So, but I wouldn't pay too much attention to the job titles, but perhaps the job
Yeah.
description and then just, you know,
Yeah, I would say, I mean, if you're really interested in working with people, and it's interesting. I rarely hear people talk about this more often. I wish they would. Like facilitator, like corporate trainer, you're dealing with people all day long. Like that is, there's so many jobs in the world of facilitation. Training coordinator, as you mentioned, where you might be doing some light instructional design, but you might be working with people. Learning program manager, you're doing a lot of that strategy work that Kix has been talking about in her career. It's definitely not all instructional designer sitting behind a computer creating e-learning courses all day. I mean, that is a lot of it, right? But it's not all of it. There's all sorts of roles where it might be a mix of those things or dedicated trainers. I mean, when I worked at GoDaddy, a good example, and I know we're coming to the end of our time here, but if we have a few extra minutes, when I worked at GoDaddy, we had over 120 people on our learning and development team. 120 people on the L&D team. Only 20 of those were instructional designers, as we all define it.
yes.
Maybe 30 of them were learning program managers, and the rest were facilitators, working with people all day, training out in the
Yes.
field. So, like, it's just instructional design, and obviously I have a community focused on instructional design and e-learning development, right? I recognize that, but it like dominates the conversation, but it is only one part of what makes up our industry.
Yes.
Yeah. What other advice? Any final closing words or advice you have for anybody, Kix?
Stay true to yourself. Adulthood is ghetto, life is hard. And I know that sometimes, there are bills that need to be paid. And
Yeah.
so, you may not necessarily have the luxury of like following your passion and doing what you like and doing all the things. but wherever you find yourself, stay true to yourself, and, let your life speak. Allow yourself to, allow your passion to find expression in your day to day. So even if you hate instructional design and that is the job that you have now, within that environment, first of all, recognize that even having that job is a blessing. It may not be what you want to do, but is a blessing. But within that ecosystem and that space, how can you allow your gift and your natural gift, talent, and ability to find expression? So whether it's like, making your coworkers happy, or being the internal in-house therapist for your co-workers, or whatever it is, whatever your jam is. If it's cooking, cooking for your co-workers, you just never know. I have one of my co-workers at Amnesty International. She would always bake as a hobby. Now she has a whole website. She's doing big things. I messaged her the other day. I was like, you better send me some pastries, but while she was doing what was she doing? Data, right? Research, and that was her work. But now she has a, website for, pastry and all the things. So just allow yourself to continue to express those passion and talents in whatever way that you can, and life is in seasons. So that's another thing I'm learning in my adult life and in this season that I'm in. There was one time it was rosy and now it's kind of rough, but I'm leaning into the discomfort of growth and transformation that it's bringing about in me. I'm learning a lot about humility and resilience and patience, and, make out of nothing. So look at me, I'm hosting a women's event, personal development event, leveraging my network, identifying speakers. If you look at my old portfolio, I actually have a conference. I shared this with him that I've been looking to implement, and I'm finally implementing it sometime this year. It's called Vision Activate, hashtag get it off the ground. That thing gives me joy. That's my jam. That's where I thrive. I want to, facilitate conversations, bring people together, help us move forward, help us harness our collective resources to achieve more. And I realized that when I was in corporate America, that's me. I'm always helping employees make connections, build relationships, have uncomfortable conversations, facilitate uncomfortable conversations. That's my jam. And so, that's my advice. Just leave.
Yeah. Well, what
Yeah.
I love about that, and if we have one more question that I want to, do you have a few minutes, Kix?
Yes, yes, yes,
Yes.
yes, yes.
Okay. But one thing I want to say about what you just said is, which I think is super powerful. You're not waiting for somebody to say, hey, go be a change agent. You're doing it. You're going to create it
Yes.
your own, you're not waiting for somebody to invite you to the table. You're going to go create your own freaking table,
Yeah.
So that's what
Yeah.
I love about it. All right. This last question comes from Valerie. Valerie wants to know, she says, you talk about transitioning teachers and how they're still educators. I agree with you. I've always been an educator and I will always be. But do the employers know the value of what we develop as teachers? Sometimes I feel the look for an expert in their domain who will teach, but an expert doesn't necessarily know how to help their professional development over employees. That's a great question. Here's what I want to say about that. This can be my 2 cents, is that, uh, when people are hiring, people always have biases and people have different levels of awareness about who they're interviewing. And in the private sector, you might interview with somebody. It doesn't have to be the private sector; it can be any sector. In a non-education setting, you might be interviewing with somebody who has no idea what a teacher actually does day in and day out. And so they're going to question, like, is your skill set going to translate to this environment? But here's what I want you to remember. That same level of questioning happens no matter what other different industry you come from. Let's say you're coming out of retail. I have a background in retail and retail learning and development. If I went and applied for a job at a tech company, they're going to ask the same question. Does you translate from retail into, technology or vice versa? And so do they recognize what teachers have to bring to the table? Some will, some won't. In either case, it is your job to help them see that and help them see how the skills translates. If you're sitting around waiting for everyone to understand and respect what you do, you're going to be sitting there for a long time.
Absolutely.
So don't sit there passively waiting for them to come to some epiphany that you as an educator bring all this value. Of course you bring all this value. You got to put it in their face and show them and go, look, I can do it, and be unapologetic about it.
Yes.
I don't know. What do you have thoughts on that, Kix?
Absolutely. Like, it doesn't matter whether you're an educator, you're here to transfer knowledge. And as long as they know that they have a performance gap, and your job is to help them close that gap. That's all that matters. And everything team said.
Yeah. Good. There are a couple more people typing in chat, so we'll give it one more second. While we close up, feel free to connect with Kix on LinkedIn. I will put your LinkedIn real quickly in chat, and you all know how to connect with me. And Kike. See, I got it. Thank you so much for joining me. It was a great conversation.
Same here.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Everyone. Yes, thank you, everyone. Have a great night, and we'll see you around. Bye, everyone.